This is Xane Anderson, and welcome today to the Principal Podcast. Today, I'm happy to have John Brewer. Today, John is a Special Forces veteran. He's got years of experience helping people protect themselves, defend life and family, and I just am thrilled to have him here. John, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
So I joined the military in 2011, straight out of college, and at the time, actually, I didn't know I wanted to join the military until probably about 6 months before that, just because I happened to speak to a recruiter that was at the same gym that I worked out at. But once I knew about Special Forces or Army Special Forces, I knew that's kind of like the type of job that I would want to do in the military. And from there, I started my career. I was selected, which means that I went through selection, and then I was selected to be part of the qualification course. And then from there, I went and was, after completing it in 2014, I was then assigned to 5th Special Forces Group in Tennessee. And that's where I spent most of my career, and that's where I deployed from. But truly, the reason why that's such a beneficial thing to me anyway is because the whole mindset of Special Forces, and SF for short, sometimes that's what it's called, is the kind of whole, like, getting stuff done, and no matter if you have the resources or not, and kind of the whole problem solving. And then that's kind of been implemented in every aspect of my life, and probably one of the main topics that I'd speak about today as well. So yeah, it's just pretty much I was active duty for just under 10 years. Then I came over to Maryland National Guard, just finished that up. Didn't end up re-signing my contract just because I have this startup now and I want to spend time doing that. But yeah, so I just finished up my military career actually, and it's kind of a bittersweet moment. But at the same time, I do think I'm in the right place and the right time to kind of do other things and help out individuals here in the States rather than, deploying and doing it overseas.
I like that. Well, as we think about this as it relates to parents, I like what you said here. This thought that you have to get stuff done, whether you've got the resources or not. And I think a lot of times parents find themselves in that same situation. It's like, hey, I've got to protect my family. I got to provide for my family. And sometimes I may or may not feel like I have the resources. And so your expertise is greatly appreciated today. So let me tell you something. My thoughts that I had as I thought about this today. As a father, and I think many fathers feel this, and probably most fathers, we have this innate sense that it's our job to protect our family. It's our job to provide for our family, whether we feel like we have the right resources or not. We got to find a way, like you were saying, and get it done. Okay. Both of these, this need to protect, this need to provide, and which I think is a responsibility of fathers. What would you tell fathers or parents, maybe even mothers who are listening to the show, about how to protect their family based on your background? Is there any tips you would give, or some of your experience you can share with us?
Yeah. Well, I'd say one, if you're thinking about it already, you're ahead of the game. It's, for myself and probably a lot of people, even if you're not in the military or law enforcement, I consider myself hyper vigilant, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because sometimes I'm thinking about security stuff when I shouldn't be. But at the same time, it does give me that little bit of extra analysis when it comes to situations, because I'm not just, I'm thinking about the security aspect. And a lot of times I find myself kind of losing sleep a little bit because I kind of go into rabbit holes about this, that, and what ifs. But so one, there is a fine line between being prepared and kind of being obsessed with this type of topic. And it's best to always understand where you're at as a human being, to know that when you are kind of falling down in a deeper hole of obsession, I say obsession, but just, going down a little too deep in the rabbit hole, that you bring yourself back and just understand, especially if you're with your family at the time, you take a deep breath, you take a look over to your family and say, hey, they're safe. There's nothing to really be truly worried about at this time. Now, outside of that, I think the main point would be just to understand the situation. And that seems simple, but it's not, because really, truly, we fear what we don't understand. And so if we gain a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more perspective on a topic, then usually our worries kind of resolve, whether or not we're actually implementing practical solutions, or it's just because we understand the situation a little bit better. For example, obviously when we see stuff in the news, it seems like it's happening everywhere all at once, almost like that movie that just came out. I think it's titled Everywhere All at Once, something like that. But yeah, so we think that what's actually happening in the news is happening right outside our door, and it's happening on the minute, every minute. But in reality, but it's there, but it's not pertaining to you, which means that, obviously, obviously there are bad things happening. That's why we want to stay prepared. But at the same time, truly the odds are that any of those types of situations, especially when it comes to active shooters, kidnapping, things like that we kind of worry about right now, odds are that they probably won't ever hit your doorstep, and thankfully so. But at the same time, if we take a little bit of time to prepare for us, even if it's just we take 5 minutes and we think about it, or we do a little bit of research and or problems. And so it's like this balance of being prepared, but then not getting, not taking security as like, now it's your main job. You're always thinking about it. And you're like, you're Captain Security walking around the house, just trying to always think of scenarios and things like that. So like I said, it's definitely, it's definitely that mental health aspect, to where you want to make sure you're staying in the right place for yourself, and then also being prepared for your family. And, once you kind of dive into it a little bit, you'll start to see a little bit of that balance. And obviously, if your family thinks it's getting out of control, hopefully they bring it up to you and say, hey, we talk about this quite a bit. You need to, maybe we can, go to the movies, or, have fun, or, whatever it might be. But at the same time, especially for, newcomers that haven't really thought about it, when you first jump into it, I'm sure you'll be all about it, and that's what you think about 24/7. But you do have to understand that is an aspect of your life. It's not the entirety of your life.
Right. I like that. One of the things you said, it's interesting because, I think the news does serve up a disproportionate amount of negative, kind of scary stuff, because they know that it gets clicks, it gets ratings. People, for some reason, gravitate to this kind of scary thing. And you're right, from a statistical standpoint, your chances of being involved in one of these things are quite low. I mean, so you're right, you don't need to go around living in complete fear. At the same time, one of the things you said, and I'll tell you a story just briefly. One time I took my wife camping, it was years ago, and I just said, we're going to go camping out in the woods. And it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. And we were just, as we were chatting, we were walking along, and by the way, I did not have like a weapon or anything with me. We were just camping. As we were walking along, I said, what, if there was a bear, maybe we just should hit the car alarm on the car, because it would probably scare him away. We had this like 30-second conversation about it. Well, interestingly enough, that night at about 1 a.m. in the morning, I heard this some snapping twigs in the distance. And I said, hey, did you hear that? My wife kind of, what? She was half asleep, and they got big. They got closer and closer. And I said, hey, did you hear that? And they got closer and closer. And soon you could hear, you could almost feel the ground kind of vibrating. This very large animal came up right next to the tent. It was in the middle of the night, and started going. And at that point, my wife was completely up, and we were totally not thinking straight, because we had, what is this animal out here? And I do believe it was a bear, but we ended up, because we had that talk, we hit the car alarm. And within a few or three, we hit it a few times actually. After hitting it several times, the animal left, and we were okay. I don't think, if I wouldn't have had that conversation beforehand, it was kind of so disconcerting that I would have thought about it. And so the fact that I did think about it for a little bit when the things were not stressful made it so that when the actual situation happened, I knew what to do, and we'd already thought it. Is there any examples that you could give us? Like, I know every situation's different, but can you give us an example of understanding your security situation? You mentioned that. Like, so, you could even say, I walk into a store, I walk into a school, or I walk into a theater, or I walk into, or whatever it is. Can you give us a specific example of what you might look for in that specific example, even though we know there's probably thousands or, even millions of different examples we could talk about?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one, for your bear example. I actually have land out in North Carolina, and I think even though I've never seen a bear out there, I think about bears quite a bit when I'm out there. And so I actually do bring a shotgun out there, which I know that
Smart.
depending on, I mean, I think black bears might be in North Carolina, and they don't get too big, and maybe a shotgun would kind of scare them away, but I don't know how much it would hurt them. But at the same time, obviously, like you said, it's best to consider it, and then hopefully it doesn't happen. And if it does, then you're that much more prepared, even if it's just, a tiny percentage. Anything is better than nothing. But at the same time, when it comes to, what I'll say is, we'll just say active shooters, because that's obviously on everybody's mind right now with what's kind of current events of happening. So active shooters, obviously, most of the time their motives are, that's a little bit of what I go off of is, you know when it comes to active shooters, that demographic of who actually carries out those acts is kind of specific, right? It's in which I won't go into that because there's a little bit of profiling, but at the same time, I understand that their motives is either just mass chaos, and they do want to commit as much of a, as many murders as they can as possible. So they're going to be in crowded areas. So first and foremost, if I ever go into a crowded area, that is a consideration I have. I'm like, hey, especially if it's like the movie theater thing happened back in, when was that, like early in the 2010s, whenever that was, with the Batman thing. And then also with the shopping center up in New York. So it's always going to be crowded venues that these active shooters happen, and then obviously schools. So anytime I go into a place like that or an event, I'm always I scan for the exits. So obviously I'm coming into an exit, so that's my first exit. But also at the same time, I'm looking for any avenues of escape, and then also exit that I can use. And then I try to maintain close vicinity to those, and normally outside of the crowd. So if it happens to be an area to where it is pretty crowded, I stay on the outside of the crowds, because one, I hate crowds. I don't like to be in the middle of the crowd. I actually have season tickets to the Carolina Panthers, and anytime we're waiting in line to get into the stadium, I am on edge, just because I don't like being in close proximity to people. Not that I have a phobia or anything. It's just I just don't like being cramped like that. But when I get into those venues, I'm always and restaurants is an easy one too. Like when I want to sit down in restaurants, if I can help it, I want to sit next to a wall, have my back to a wall, and then I can see everything around me. And that's just so I can maintain a little bit of awareness for what's going on. I'm not saying that I think I'm going to get shot in Outback or anything like that, but
Sure.
obviously that's a consideration.
Sure.
So those are the real things, and I kind of call that like positioning. Whether it's positioning within a location, and then positioning within a crowd. Obviously, I never want to be in the crowd, and if I can position myself within a particular location, it's always on the outside perimeter, and it's always near an exit, or an avenue that leads me to an exit. So that's first and foremost, and then after that, it's just more so just being aware of your surroundings. Staying out of your phone, which is kind of hard nowadays, and then also, if you are in conversation, at least peek out every now and then to kind of look around and make sure that there's not anything abnormal standing out. And obviously we all know what normal looks like. So when abnormal does stick out, it's easy to spot. And then from there, you just don't ignore it, right? So I see something that's abnormal. Maybe I see someone walk in, and and maybe he's got on a backpack and no one else has on a backpack. And I'm like, well, why is this dude carrying around a backpack? Why would he be bringing anything into, wherever I'm at? And then from there, just kind of keep an eye on them. And then if they happen to be, kind of hyper vigilant themselves, and they're looking around and scanning, and they seem a little nervous, and then they're like, okay, well, maybe I need to start taking steps to either, if I'm with people, to get them out of there, not out of there yet anyway, because nothing has happened. But at the same time, maybe we're like, hey, let's just go stand over there. And I'll just say, we'll just go reposition ourselves closer to the exit, if I truly think it's a threat. And then also at the same time, from there, obviously, once a threat presents itself, if it's a real threat, it'll keep presenting patterns that will lead to the actual action. There's never a point in time where, there's been a threat that, it's just been completely, unclear that that was going to happen. Obviously they would have to walk into the venue, they would have to, you know, position themselves and to have that attack, and then they would have to, access whatever weapons they're having. And then at that point in time, for sure, as soon as a weapon comes out, yeah, you know what it is. But at the same time, there are patterns that lead up to that anybody can really understand, or be aware of, and then just position yourself so where you're in a safe spot, or at least can get to a safe spot.
Now, let me ask you this idea of positioning, this idea of being really aware. I'm guessing this is something that was really stressed in your special forces training. Is that correct? No.
Yeah, I mean, so the term positioning, no, I'm kind of trying to coin that right now. When it relates to self-defense, but the act of, that's more like tactical consideration, and it's more of when it comes to like operational, operations in the military, you know, tactical presence would more so be, obviously a higher elevation than your enemy, always behind an object of cover and concealment, which, concealment hides your body, and then cover protects it from any bullet penetration, things of that nature. So that whole kind of mindset then crept over into positioning, because obviously, it's more, I'd say it's more like, covert type of. I would actually say positioning is more so more related to like CIA type of I say spy stuff, but I mean that's pretty much what it is. Like when anybody's doing something out in the open, and they're just trying, they're not really showing their hand, and obviously no one's going to be like, hey, I'm a CIA operative or anything like that. But at the same time, they position themselves within a location, crowd, or whatever to to do their mission. And then at the same time, obviously they have some type of security consideration. So that's what I would say. It's more so because obviously in the military side, you are actively engaged in probably some type of firefight or military operation. That's very different than what it would be on the civilian side, of where I'm just trying to maintain a posture of like security and making sure I'm safe. So that's why I say it is probably more related to that like covert espionage type of James Bond situation, rather than band of brothers getting in a machine gun fight with the Nazis or something like that.
So basically getting into you said avoiding crowds, avoiding the center of crowds, kind of being on the edge, getting into a place where you can be aware, so you, like with your back against the wall, so you can watch people who are behaving that are a little bit don't fit quite in the situation. Are they acting nervous, or do they, like you mentioned, the background kind of thing? Just being aware of those things is a really good situational thing. Let me ask you this: do you teach these type of thought processes? I mean, it seems like you teach them to others. Do you think it'd be a good idea for parents to teach this to their children, this kind of thought process, as you said?
Absolutely. Actually, I kind of recommend, obviously children shouldn't be taught anything above their developmental stage, right? So whatever developmental stage it is, obviously you stay within that realm, because you don't want to give, you're not going to teach kids about, certain types of crime and things like that. And really, obviously, and they wouldn't understand it depending on what their age, but obviously, because once a kid gets to a certain age of like stranger danger, and they're able to understand certain stuff like that, obviously that's more, what I would recommend, making sure that they understand that, hey, you're always going to try to reach a trusted adult. That's first and foremost. So if they're ever in a situation where they're a little distance away from an adult, for, whether that's a park or school or whatever, as soon as something that's a little weird to them starts happening, they go find that trusted adult. And obviously trusted is the key word here, because it can't just be any adult, right? And it has to be someone they trust. And then also at the same time, more dynamic situations. Obviously there's, in the military and other places, they call them standard operating procedures, right? SOPs. And SOPs are something that can be taught to children at a young age. Like I said, once they start to understand stranger danger and things like that.
Give us an example of an SOP you might teach a child.
Yeah. So the very simple one is calling 911. So an SOP I would recommend is that, especially if they're at home, one, they need to know where a phone is always at. And if you don't, most people don't have landlines anymore. So obviously it'd probably be a cell phone. They need to know where a cell phone is going to be. And that's kind of hard because we're always taking it with us at certain points in time. But at the same time, there probably needs to be an SOP established to where, like, hey, because bad things happen to adults too. And what happens if something happens to the adult and then the kid needs to call 911? So they need to know where that phone is, how to dial 911. And obviously from there the operator takes it over and kind of goes to their script. But at the same time, that would be an SOP I recommend. A very simple one, very straightforward. Where's the phone? How to call 911? And then, I mean, they should be able to talk and talk to the operator.
It seems like even these SOPs or these standard operating, you could have almost any, if you can take a little bit of time, like for example, if the house catches on fire, we're going to meet like at the mailbox or something, so that like we're not wondering, are you in the backyard or front yard, you're on the side or in the alley or wherever people are, that we're going to meet at a certain spot, or we're going to meet over at the neighbor's house, or whatever it is. If there's an emergency, how are we going to get in contact with each other if we can't, like let's just say cell phones were down because there was a major catastrophe of some sort. How would we communicate? Would we leave a note at the door? Would we leave a note under the rock? How would we do it, right? It seems like thinking those kinds of things through when things are calm and there's no emergency, if there is actually a situation, it's going to be really helpful.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, because I just got done writing in one of my chapters that confusion runs rampant in chaos, and that's exactly what happens. And even if you do have a plan, sometimes it happens where there's obviously confusion that gets thrown in there because you're in a heightened state of awareness. Your blood pressure's up, heart rate's up, your respiratory rate is up, and with all that stuff going on, you're not going to think too clearly unless you just happen to train that on a somewhat daily basis. And obviously that's where like some of the military practice that I've had comes into play, because we did do that all the time, of running through scenarios or whatever it is, or whatever type of training, so that when it came to the real stuff, it wasn't really a shock anymore. It was just more so running through the motions and I mean, I hate to say it, but more mundane, of like, okay, well, this is just another thing we're going through, and it's just the same thing as training. And obviously there's a different little aspect of it of, I could, there's a possibility of dying. But at the same time, once you have a very focused idea of what needs to happen, your brain doesn't even really think about that anymore. You just kind of do the task at hand, and it goes from there. So that's why, like, I talk about SOPs because one, they should be also universal. So the difference between like a plan, a safety plan, and then a SOP is the fact that safety plans are very specific to an actual scenario. And really the only times that they can really get too specific is when you talk about home invasions, because obviously you kind of can prep, you can kind of plan for almost every contingency that would arise from a home invasion, because that's your house. So you should know everything about it. Now, anything outside of that, you can have plans, but there's always going to be deviations, and you'll have to adapt to certain circumstance and things like that. So that's where SOPs come in, because SOPs being universal, they can fit into any plan. Like I said, with the call 911, that's
it doesn't matter if you're at your house or you're at the park or at the library, right, or wherever it is, right?
Right. So that's the real benefit of SOPs, is that they're pre-planned. And I say that in quotation marks because I do want to differentiate it from a plan. I mean, it is a plan, but at the same time, it's universal. And a plan, to me anyway, is more a step-by-step process, and you kind of want to stick within that, because anything outside of that plan is more of an adaptation and more of like, figuring out other stuff, which obviously there could be other plans involved that kind of trickle down, and then you have plan A, plan B, plan C, stuff like that. But for the most part, SOPs are universal. They're very quick and to the point, and it's just like, hey, something like this happens, or not even something like this happens. In the case of an emergency, pretty much do this, and then it's very quick and to the point.
Maybe give us some others. Besides, I really like to call 911. Like, where's a phone? Where can I find a phone? Mom and dad are out of something bad
Yeah.
happened. You call 911. Can you give us another example? Maybe some SOPs that would be good for parents to have besides just to
Yeah.
call 911.
First aid. I'm big on, I actually reclassed to a medic as I was getting out of active duty. So I'm pretty big on the medicine side too. I think that everybody should have a first aid, everybody should have an SOP for a first aid kit. So actually having a first aid kit and what's in it, and then also where that's placed in the house. And you should probably have multiple depending on how big your house is. And then that everybody in your household knows how to use the equipment in that first aid kit, and then actually probably every now and then practices it on each other to make sure they know exactly how to use it. And those are just very basic equipment. I'm not talking about like surgical equipment. I'm talking about like ace bandages and tourniquets go a long way. I know probably a lot of people don't know what they are, but they're just a way to stop a bleeding. It actually cuts off the arterial flow to a full limb, so you'll stop a bleed in an entire limb. But yeah, so that's what I would say is the next SOP that's a little bit more involved, because obviously you have to set up that first aid equipment. You have to know what type of equipment it is, and you have to know how to use it. So there's a little bit of training that comes with that too. But at the same time, I would say that's the next, if not probably the first priority when it comes to SOPs is to be able to have that first aid kit and know how to use it.
Jeff, do you have any idea of where people could get this training if they did have an idea where to get? I mean, obviously, if you have an EMT that's a friend, you could ask them to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, could you come over and give us an hour of your knowledge on a night where we're all together and we can practice a little bit." I mean, is there any standard, any organization or anything that you'd recommend to say, "Hey, you can call this resource or this resource," or would you just say, just be
Yeah.
resourceful and find it?
Uh, well, no, I would say, obviously, so CPR is one of, obviously that doesn't fall into the first aid kit, but that is a medical intervention that needs to be known by everybody, obviously. And so that comes from the Red Cross. So Red Cross, they do their thing. They have trainings here and there you can hop onto. They're probably either at your local like community centers usually, or you'll probably just go to the Red Cross website and find training in your area. Outside of that, when it comes to like trauma medicine and things of that nature, I do know that there's a lot of companies out there that are starting to, which they're kind of, I say a lot. I mean, there's a handful that I know, but they're kind of sporadic throughout the United States. So it's hard to say what's going to be in your area. But there are ex-military guys, and they kind of do, and they could be ex-law enforcement as well. But they'll do like trauma training to where they actually do run scenarios. And so if you happen to be in those areas, it would be good. I mean, they're going to be a little pricey, but you won't get any training like that anywhere else to where they actually simulate, trauma and the blood squirting and this, that, and other, and that type of stuff. And being able to be in that situation really trains the mechanisms of treating a person, and also the psychological aspect of it to where like, to get all that confusion out of the way so that when, it happens in real life, it's not all a shock. And
And
so,
where can you get that training again? Did you say?
well,
But
there's a couple.
like where it actually seems pretty real, or you said blood squirting or something. I mean, where
Yeah,
can you get
there's a
that?
couple. Yeah, there's a couple companies out there, and I don't remember their name off the top of my head. I mean, I'm actually probably connected with a bunch of them on LinkedIn,
Sure.
there's probably a lot more that I don't know about, but
Red Cross,
and some,
that's just basic CPR. That's
yeah, but I would say so. Red Cross is your first resource. They won't really go. They don't get. I don't think they go really into like trauma and bleeding and stuff like that. They're just more so that basic CPR, choking, which is all good stuff too. Because actually, I had to. My niece had choked a couple months ago, and I had to step in, and she was maybe 8 months at the time, and which it had been a long time since I had done the CPR training that we do. But at the same time, all that kind of came back to me right there in that moment, because that's one thing I was very deathly afraid of my daughter when she was first born and starting to eat solid food was choking. I was like, man, if she starts, like, I would just watch her as she's eating to make sure, she didn't start choking. And anytime she would took a handful of something that was too much, I'd be like, I'm right there just waiting. waiting to step in. And thankfully, nothing has happened with her. But at the same time, choking and CPR, those are taught by the Red Cross, and I do believe that those are very beneficial, especially if you have young children. And then the trauma stuff, what I can do is I can put out a list or send you a list in case you want to like put it up somewhere. And like I said, they'll be kind of, I think there's a couple down in Texas, and then some out west. And then actually maybe in the future, that's more so what if I have a physical space for training, that's what I'll start implementing too. But at the same time, uh, and I really, for Google searching, you might just be able to do like trauma medicine training or, something like that. And it'll come up a couple searches that you could probably go into. YouTube obviously is going to have, especially actually for YouTube, I would say like EMTs, when they get certified, or paramedics, they go through a trauma scenario. And some of those have those videos up, and it shows you how they go through their like problem solving process. And I won't say that they're 100% correct, because I've seen some of them that are a little wrong on certain stuff that they're doing, but it's just little stuff. But yeah, so you'll actually get to watch how like when an EMT comes to a scene, how they're like, and they'll say stuff out loud. They'll say, "Hey, my scene is safe. It doesn't seem to be anything else going on. I have this many patients. It looks like they have a gunshot wound to their leg," and then they start going through their stuff. And so they're saying everything out loud because then their instructors, right, they're grading them, so they got to make sure that they're seeing everything that they see. So even stuff on YouTube like that is a little helpful to be able to understand the thought process of what medical professionals go through when they come to a scene.
Interesting. I like that. So one of the things I liked about when we first started out talking about this, you're talking about, I'm going to go into a restaurant or crowded space. I'm going to sit on the edge, and the whole thought underlying that to me was kind of like prevention. So let's talk about the prevention mindset. Obviously, we'd like to not even have a home invasion in the first place. I mean, if there's a home invasion, now we've got an acute, really intense safety issue. What are some things that you would say, some actual things? And I know, I guess from a parenting's perspective, I mean, none of us want to have a home invasion. So what would you do to prevent that? What would you do to prevent an attack? I know the situational awareness. Let's talk a little bit about some things, specific things you do to prevent bad things from happening, so you don't even have to deal with them. Obviously, if someone's bleeding on the ground, you do want to know how to help them. But now you've got a really acute situation. How do I prevent, and maybe just give us a few ideas, bad things from happening?
Yeah. So, so prevention, I'll talk about in two ways. Obviously, the home invasion side, and then just being out in public. So the home invasion side is, there's certain things that I would do. Right now, we live in townhouse, so we can't really do that. But if I had a home, one, I would have a fence. So put that fence up, put it, to where most of your yard is contained within that fence, because you want that physical barrier. Then when it comes closer into the house, you don't want any type of bushes or trees that kind of prevent you from either seeing outside of your home, or it gives people an area to hide out, around your home, especially near windows and things like that. And then obviously, so this goes back to SOPs, and I call them security SOPs in the book. Obviously, that's not really differentiated outside of my book, but I do that because it's meant for a certain purpose. So what we talked about before with first aid placement and location, and then also what's in your first aid kit, that's more so a placement SOP. And then outside of that is security SOPs, which are just habits that you would do as a daily behavior that then prevents any type of crime happening to you. And so when it comes to your house and home invasion, the security SOP would be locking your doors. That's first and foremost. Make sure your doors are locked. Also, if you have a security system or anything like that, the security system is up and running. The cameras are in the position that they need to be able to see a full, the full area of your house. Like I said, going back to the trees and bushes, can't have a tree or a bush in the way of the field of view of the camera. And kind of having that, especially for mom and dads, to where, we have our routine behavior, putting our kids down to bed, but then we got to once that's finished, we got to go downstairs or wherever, make sure everything's locked up, and I've done it before to where there's been nights where our garage door was left open, and then the next morning we find out and we're like, man, uh, you know, good thing nothing happened, because we were vulnerable all night long. And so that's the thing is, even when you're tired and you don't feel like doing it, you have to go through the motions. And it should be a daily practice of like, hey, is our garage down? Yes. Is all the windows down? Yes. Are our doors locked? Yes. Same thing for getting in and out of the car, especially if you're in an area where you're a little unsure about, making sure your car doors are locked, because they automatically lock now, usually the newer cars anyway, when you start to pick up speed after you get in, and then they'll block around like 10 to 15 miles per hour. Well, they should probably be locked beforehand as you're sitting there in the vehicle, because what ends up happening is we get in our vehicle, we shut the door, we mess with our phone, or we mess with something else. And that whole time we're looking down on, at whatever we're doing, there could be stuff happening outside our vehicle or someone coming and approaching our vehicle. And if our doors are unlocked, they have very easy access. And then so getting even further from that, so when we're out in public, that kind of so really what it's about is making yourself a hard target. And what a hard target, so to kind of give you a comparison, and this is kind of a military thing, so hard targets are those targets that are, they have a good physical, security, which, like I said, is either that fence or that wall or that barrier or something that's keeping you from the actual interior of whatever location it is. And then it's also got, good security. So it's got roving guards, and it's got, guns situated here. And then maybe there's some type of technology there that's making it even harder to penetrate. And so that's what's considered a hard target. A soft target would be like a shack in the middle of a field and everyone's asleep and no one's out, pulling security or whatever else. So those are the different kinds of like targets that we kind of categorize when we're looking at, what we need to do to be able to infiltrate that target or what have you. So on the civilian side of it, making yourself a hard target is more so about like posturing. So making sure you're not slouched over. You want to be, obviously standing tall, shoulders back, that whole kind of like, cotillion type of, I don't know if I said that right, but that whole popular like posture and things like that. You want to make eye contact with people. So you don't want to be down on your phone. You want to be making sure every time I walk past someone, which I'm in Maryland now, so nobody really does it, but I would greet people as they walk by me. That's kind of my North Carolina heritage there, to where I just say, hey,
that up.
yeah, I just say, hey, how's it going? And that's actually how I kind of start gauging people, right? Because if they give me the same greeting back, and it seems like a normal greeting, then I don't really think about them too much. But if it's someone that just kind of looks at me and either, whatever their demeanor is, that's how I gauge like, okay, well, I never like really look behind. I might look in like reflections to see what they're doing in the background. And that, like I said, that's more of my hypervigilant state. Obviously, nothing has ever happened. It's not like I say, hey, how's it going? And they get behind me and they put me at chokehold. But at the same time, that's my first impression of someone is to say, hey, is this person friendly or do they have alternate motives? Because if it's at night and I happen to be walking down an alleyway, which I shouldn't be doing anyway, because I should be walking in well-lit areas, in populated areas. But if it happens to be me and I'm going down the alleyway and I happen to walk past somebody, I'm going to still greet them. I'm going to say, hey, how's it going? And if they don't seem like they're a quote unquote normal person, then I'm going to be really, heightened, in a heightened state of awareness. And I'm probably going to be ready to defend myself, just because one, there's a couple of things happening, the placement, the time of day, obviously all these factors are ended up to where, it's just not an ideal situation to be in. But at the same time, that greeting is what gives me my first initial impression. And then after that, it's just like, going back to the hard target thing is, I want to make it look like I'm the toughest dude around, right? And that's for anybody, because criminals, they don't want to exert a lot of effort when it comes to the crimes they commit. They want an easy target. They want something that either they can get in and get out really quick, because one, they want to escape. And if they have to spend time fighting you to get what they want, that's more time that other people can come help you, or that police are called and then the police are on their way. So really, when criminals are looking for those easy targets, so as long as you make yourself a hard target, I'd say that's half the battle right there. And then obviously the last little bit of it, if something was to happen, is more of your preparedness and training, physical fitness, and things of that sort.
Like that. Thanks so much. One of the things, this is awesome for people who want to get a hold of you. I know you're an author. You're writing a book called Fight for Your Best Life, and it's an upcoming book that's on safety and self-defense. And did I get the title right?
Yep. Yeah.
Fight for Your Best Life. Awesome. And
Yeah.
you said,
So
where will that be available, John?
so it's going to be mostly Amazon. It'll be both an ebook and a printed version as well. And then, yeah, so I would say that's the main part. I am going to also do an audiobook because I know for myself, I don't like, it's ironic. I don't like to read too much. I always listen to audiobooks. So that is something that I'm going to go do as well. But the audiobook will be a little bit behind the actual printed book itself, but not too far behind. I think it'll still be within this year.
That's wonderful. For anyone who wants to get more information from you, I think this is really, at least from my perspective as a father, I could talk about this all day. we could have like a 6-hour podcast on this. Where could they find you?
Yeah, so my website, mindshieldandSpear.com, is going to have the link to my LinkedIn in case, which, LinkedIn is more so for like collaboration with other professionals, because I definitely do want to get, if you happen to be a professional in the security space, reach out to me there and we can kind of work on projects together. But at the same time, Mind Shield and Spear right now is kind of bare bones because I want to get this book out and develop that. But at the same time, once the book comes out, then I'm going to kind of rotate my focus to the business side of it. I'm going to start I'm going to start developing, further articles that kind of expand on the book. I'm going to try to bring in certain type of training and things of that. So mindshieldandSpear.com is going to be the resource to go to for anything training and stuff like that. The book is going to give you that foundation, and then the website is going to start expanding on that foundation because that's really what the book is about. The book is about, it's given you a practical framework and kind of foundation of security, even if you've never ever dealt with it before, so that then, the very basics and how I kind of my perspective on things. And then from there, you have the building blocks to build upon. And like you said, and really, it is a self-help book as well. That's why it's, titled Fight for Your Best Life, because not only do I want you to be, security minded and safe and secure, but I also want you to reach your life goals, right? And I do think that in theory, you can't reach that unless you have a safe life, or, you have some type of security consideration. And all these things that you get in like, martial arts training or, firearms or things like that are transferable skills that can be then applied to any aspect of your life, especially problem solving, because that's the thing about self-defense and security. It gives you a very unique training on problem solving, which is done in every aspect of your life. So if you can solve problems in a very chaotic life or death situation, you can solve pretty much any problem there is, whether that's figuring out what's for dinner, or what to wear the next day, or whatever it is. So I do think that the book, it will give you practical solutions, but it also help you out and trying to figure out where your life direction, or just aligning your life with what you truly want to do.
I love that. So feel free to mindshieldandSpear.com. You can also find Fight for Your Best Life on Amazon. These are great resources. John, I'm just going to backtrack one little bit. Just because it's something that I noticed as we were talking. One of the things I've noticed, even as we're talking, is you seem very level-headed. You seem like you take a very level-headed approach. I mean, as we're talking about these really serious, kind of scary things, even, it's just like, hey, here's a detailed plan, what we can talk about. Tell us just a little bit more about mindset, or this ability. It seems like that's an important piece. Something that happens, and people a lot of times will go into this panic, and you're right, they're not thinking straight. How do you keep your mindset level-headed?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes, actually in the moment, comes from training, and you can't get away from it unless you actually run yourself through those scenarios and that type of training. There are going to be some, I'll call it deviations in your emotion, to where, you're going to kind of be up and down until you find your balance between that. But, how I kind of see stuff, one, I do think that, because I can't say that I was like this all my life. I definitely wasn't. It wasn't until I joined the military, and even then, it wasn't until certain stuff, on deployments and things like that, that I really gained perspective on a lot of stuff. And that's why I say, like, perspective is a huge thing in life. Like, if you're very closed-minded and you're very into yourself, and don't really branch out to understand different perspectives of the world, then you're not going to be as prepared as you could be in certain situations. And then also at the same time, uh one, you have to understand that bad things do happen, and that they can happen at any moment's notice. And that's not to scare you, that's not to create fear, that's just to show the reality of how the world is. And we have to be realistic about things, and that's the thing is obviously, uh I say certain stuff, and I'm calm right now, but if something was to happen to my family, I probably would be a lot different person than what you would see here. But at least at the same time, uh, and hopefully I'm doing the things that I need to do, prepare, to prevent whatever situation that might be. Now, we're not Nostradamus, and we can't see into the future, and there's an infinite amount of situations that could happen. But, like I said, at the end of the day, it comes down to being able to identify and analyze problems that are more relevant to your life. So obviously you got to kind of sit down and say, hey, what's going on in my life? What are the possible threats? And then how do I mitigate those threats? And then once you kind of got that going on, and you kind of refining it as your life continues, or progresses, and maybe there's new things that come in, but everything is still within that circle, I'd say you're doing pretty well for yourself. And you don't really need to worry about too much. You don't need to worry about meteors falling down from the sky, or the earth opening up and everybody falling into it. You just need to worry about the stuff that's more relevant to your family, your goals, and things like that. So just make sure you stay within your circle. You do the things to protect your circle, and then don't worry about too much of the rest of it, because obviously, there's a 0.0001 chance that it'll affect you in the long run. And there is a chance, and because there's always a chance, but at the same time, your focus needs to be where it's most important, which is your family, what's important to your family, and then go from there.
John Brewer, well, thank you for these great points. For those listening, reach out to John in the way we've talked. Mind, Shield, and Spear. You should get your book that's upcoming soon. Fight for Your Best Life. And John, again, it's an honor to have you. And again, John, Special Forces, upcoming author. Great tips today. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.